I believe in hiring specialists, but early on, these specialists need to be willing to be multifunctional, okay? They have to wear multiple hats. You might have somebody who is specializing in YouTube long form editing, but you're probably gonna need them to cut some fucking short clips and maybe even create some thumbnails. That is okay. In the beginning, that is what you're gonna need, and so you need to make sure that you emphasize that in the hiring process. Here's an example. If you're at the very beginning stages and you're limited on budget, you probably need a videographer and an editor, but you might not be able to afford hiring both, and so you're going to hire somebody who can do both, somebody who can film and edit. You gain a lot of efficiencies in that. Ultimately, down the road, you're gonna want to send them down one path or the other so that they can be the specialist and you can get the most out of their skill set. But in the beginning, you have to have people wearing multiple hats. So again, if you need a videographer and editor and you have a very limited budget, I recommend hiring somebody who is skilled at both. Now, you need to make sure you identify which one is the priority. If you prioritize really good filming and steady hand and all that shit, great question asking, and maybe they're not as good at editing, maybe that is an okay concession to make at the stage you are currently at. Now, why does this actually matter? Like, why do we want to not overhire? I mean, it seems obvious, but I'm gonna run through just so that you really understand why you should avoid this. Number one, you avoid unnecessary payroll expenses before proving the ROI on content. I truly believe that anybody who does content correctly will get an ROI literally no matter what they do, even as an employee. However, you might not be doing it good, and you might not be at the point where you can actually hire enough people or the right people to do it well. And if that's the case, then you might be putting out content that sucks and doesn't provide anything, in which case, I don't know that I'd be scaling your team up from there. You're just gonna be hiring more people that are not capable at actually driving awareness to your content, which means you're driving your ROI down because you're adding headcount and payroll, but you're not adding any profitability or revenue to the company from the content. If you keep the team smaller and don't hire too quickly, well, you also keep operations nimble, making it flexible, easy to pivot and move around as needed. I can't tell you how many times I've had to change process, priorities, everything, because one, platforms are constantly evolving and changing and requiring new things for you to win, but also your client. If you're building a team for the CEO or founder, or if you are the CEO and founder yourself, your desired outcomes, your preferences are gonna change. You might really enjoy doing vlogging for a while and then go into a season where things are stressful and you don't want to have a camera around all the time and you need to make more sit down direct to camera style content like this. Well, you need a nimble team that is able to pivot and reverse engineer those needs. If you have a massive bloated team, oftentimes, I mean, think of it like, you know, if you're turning on a dime in a little speedboat, it's not gonna be that difficult. But if you have to turn on a dime in a fucking oil tanker, you're fucked. The last benefit that I really see here is there's a lot of context that is developed. You allow the individuals on your team to understand the various functions that you have on the team. Well, how is that helpful? Well, one, when you bring in more specialists, they're able to communicate in an educated way because they did the role, at least at some capacity. So they can speak the lingo, they can talk the talk. Two, they understand what any request they make actually takes for the other person. They know that if you're asking them to edit a video that was just shot this morning and edit it by the next morning, you're gonna be up all fucking night. A lot of people don't realize that. And so I think that it's not only effective in helping the team communicate and work together well, but you also get this benefit of if somebody is sick or quits or gets fired, you have people on the team that do, maybe not at the same level, but they understand the role and how to function within it. Now, as the team scales up, you're going to go through this process where you take these specialists who you are asking to be generalists for a short period of time, and you're gonna move them back into their specialist role again, as the team scales. And so I just wanna share a very quick little framework for you on how you go about expanding these roles gradually. Step one, you're gonna start with the multi-role hires, okay? So it's gonna be somebody who is highly proficient at filming and they're really good at editing. And so they're doing both of those tasks, okay? They're handling multiple tasks. Then what you need to do is ensure that you are documenting and defining the process. You wanna make sure that all the workflow, every little tiny little thing that this individual is doing is documented and it's super clear for the next person that comes in. Once you do that, this videographer and editor, they're highly proficient at filming and good at editing. They should document their whole process for editing. And once you hire an editor, they no longer need to edit. So they can now focus entirely on filming. They can specialize. So that leaves us to number 3, which is specialize as you scale. Once the volume starts to increase, volume of output and volume of members on the team, you can start to split roles to improve efficiency. For example, if I am an editor, but I also have to jump up every 2 hours and film with the talent I'm working for, I'm losing massive efficiency in my editing. Every editor that is watching heard that. The moment that you break out of the edit, it's not like you lose that 1 hour that you went to go film. You have another 30 to 45 minutes of trying to get back into that flow state that you were in. And honestly, a lot of times it's very difficult to get back into it in general. It doesn't take 30, 40 minutes. It might take waiting until the next day. And so anytime that you can allow somebody to stay in that flow state, especially an editor, a designer, somebody that's doing more batch work like that, you gain so much efficiency and what I subjectively call quality. Now, in the interest of starting lean and growing intentionally, a very common question that comes up for people is, well, do I hire full-time in-house employees or do I hire contractors and agencies? And so my team and I, we actually created like a whole table that we're gonna walk through that contrasts the benefits or potential downsides given different scenarios, different factors that we're wanting to keep in mind. And we're gonna compare full-time employees versus a contractor or agency. And so I'm actually gonna read this off my phone. This is something that you can download if you would like. We actually have a worksheet that you can go through and it'll help you evaluate whether you, in your scenario, should actually use a full-time employee or hire a contractor or agency. Let's dive in. So the first factor that we're looking at is budget. And this is obviously a major concern, especially for those of you who are in the early days, right? You're maybe a startup or you're a solopreneur and you don't have a lot that you're working with. This is where I'm at right now. I don't have any massive budget or anything. And so I'm having to think strategically about what I bring in full-time versus contract out. For full-time employees, it's a higher long-term cost, okay? You have salary, benefits, training, right? If you bring somebody in, you need to invest in them. And the difference between a full-time employee and a contractor here is you don't need to be training contractors. In fact, they should not require any sort of training. They should come in batteries included. They should be able to do the role immediately. You're not going to be paying for your contractors to attend a workshop or consume courses online. That's something that they should be doing on their own time and their own dime. Now, on the contractor side for budget or contractor agency, they're more cost effective for short-term projects or specialized needs. Here's a great example. This very course that we're working on, there's a full-time employee working on it and there's a contractor working on it. So behind the camera right now is Trevor Odom, and he is actually on our team. But then we are working with an amazing motion graphics artist named Michael, and he is a contractor because right now I don't have the need for full-time motion graphics. I wish I did, that'd be fucking awesome. But that's not the place that we're at right now. And so if we were to bring him on full-time, we wouldn't have enough work for him anyways. And so it's far more cost-effective and operationally less intensive to be able to just bring him on a project-by-project basis. The next factor is workload, okay? So for the full-time employee, this looks like ongoing daily tasks that require their full-time attention. If you don't, like I just mentioned with our contractor that we're working with for the motion graphics, if you don't have enough work where they're doing daily tasks, then it is most likely not a full-time role and not necessary at this point. For example, a lot of you are filming content, right? But maybe you only film once or twice a month. Why would you have a full-time videographer if all they're doing is showing up twice a month to film with you in batches? That to me is a great scenario where you would want to hire a contractor or an agency. So the workload on the contractor agency looks more like project-based, it's flexible, or it's temporary work. So maybe you have a scenario where you have an event coming up, okay? And instead of just having one videographer, you need like 4 different people going around and capturing B-roll, testimonials, filming the keynotes, whatever. This is a scenario where you might hire a bunch of contractors or an agency to fulfill this temporary work. The third factor that we want to keep in mind and use to, I guess, determine whether or not we're going to hire somebody full-time or if we're going to bring on a contractor or agency is expertise. Now, on the full-time side, typically they have deep knowledge and a long-term investment in your company. Even if they don't come in with like master level knowledge, that's fine. You're going to invest in them. And if they're the right culture fit, as we discussed throughout this whole section, they're worth it. And you're going to invest in training. You're going to provide them courses. You're going to provide them workshops. You might sit down one-on-one with them once or twice a week to really pour into them. And that's something that you're going to get the return on because they are a full-time employee working for you. However, on the flip side, contractors, not the case. Contractors should come in as the expert. Ideally, they have specialized knowledge that may not be needed long-term. So a great example of this is in the past, what I've done is hired agencies for 3 to 6 months, and we bring them in and we have them school us, teach us on what they're doing, provide us the playbooks of how we can move forward without them. I think of it like expedited learning. You're almost paying for like a fast pass to be able to move past some of the clunky learning stages that a lot of people take like 2 or 3 years to get down. You're able to accomplish that in potentially 6 months with a really quality agency. Now, the next factor is speed and agility. I have a lot of thoughts on this, but first I'm just gonna go with what we have on the table here. It takes time to onboard and train an employee, right? Typically, you're looking at 60 to 90 days before they're really up to speed and executing at the level that you're looking for. The beauty though is they do provide continuity and consistency. Okay, so once they are onboarded, in theory, as long as you do a good job of retaining them and you provide a good work environment where they're always able to grow and learn, they are more likely to stick there. And so you're gonna have the same person working on the same projects. I'm gonna kind of jump into it already, but the problem on the agency side that I've experienced is agencies do tend to have a higher turnover rate. And so, for example, when I've worked with YouTube agencies, what you'll find is you might have like 7 different editors over the course of 6 to 12 months that work on your projects because they're turning through them. No matter how good they are at having playbooks, checklists, all that shit, there is a difference. And you start to notice that it's not as consistent in the quality or in the style. You might not care about that. And so if that's not a factor that you give a shit about, fuck it. Who gives a shit? Let's just hire somebody full-time in-house if you have the amount of work necessary for that. If we're looking for extreme consistency here, I probably would not recommend going the agency route. Now, the benefit on speed and agility that you get with the contractor or agency is you do get immediate access to expertise. So unlike a 30, 60, 90-day onboarding plan with an employee, agencies would be fired immediately if it took 90 days for them to get up to speed. They're just like, that is not the way that they function. And so typically what you'll find is maybe you have an onboarding call with them, but then after that, they're ripping. And so if you do have something that you need done immediately, the agency or contractor route might be a better solution for the short term for you. Now, brand consistency. What you may think of is like making sure that they have the right logos, fonts, colors, all that shit. And that is important, and I care about that, but that's not what I emphasize the most. When I'm talking brand consistency, I'm thinking about like messaging or topics that maybe the talent we're working with have no desire to ever talk about, okay? Or maybe we know as a team that there are certain statements in context of what's being said that are fine, but if they're cut out of the context, it's gonna be really bad. That's something that you're going to be able to reinforce and establish extreme clarity on with somebody that's in-house far more than a contractor or agency. The reason why is because not only are they constantly working on projects for you, they are also involved in your internal meetings, okay? And so they're getting feedback far more consistently than an agency or contractor. So they know where they stand with the content that they are creating and when they do it right or when they do something that goes against brand guidelines. Typically on the contractor and agency side, from my experience, on brand consistency, this is one of the areas where it requires the most amount of oversight. I can't tell you the amount of times that an agency that I've worked with over the years just didn't quite get it right when it came to what we were trying to do from a brand positioning and association standpoint. Even down to simple things like if the talent on camera is referencing, a successful entrepreneur and a not successful entrepreneur, they might flash up two individuals that we want no association with. And that happened very consistently when working with contractors. And the last factor in this section that we're trying to use to determine whether or not we're going to hire somebody full-time versus a contractor or agency is scalability. Full-time employees typically, I believe, are more scalable because they are more ideal for your culture and building culture and training people into leadership roles. You're able to scale the team up, in my opinion, because maybe you hire somebody as a video editor and over a year or two train them up to be a manager and they can oversee other video editors. And because of that, they understand the culture and the DNA of the team. They understand the brand and what the preferences of that brand are. And so not only are they able to continue to use that and implement that within their work, they're able to train future members of the team. This is really good for consistency and scalability. Now, on the other hand, the benefit of contractors on this is actually not long-term scalability, but they are very useful in testing out a theory. For example, if right now you are emphasizing YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and you recognize that LinkedIn is one of the platforms that you should really fuck around with in 2025 because it is the only platform right now that has true organic reach, okay, that's an interesting hypothesis. I would argue that you are correct, but you don't totally know. And so rather than going out and hiring a full-time LinkedIn specialist that might cost you a lot of money, what you could do is take 3 to 6 months and test it out with an agency or a contractor. Then you're not making the high investment and long-term commitment to an employee, and you're just doing an experiment and validating whether or not this is something worth investing in. And so in that case, maybe we would bring on a contractor to work on our LinkedIn for 3-4 months. And they're making the content, we're tracking the performance, we're tracking whether or not it's generating qualified leads for us. But then we're also working with this contractor because they are an expert, a subject matter expert in that field, on developing a playbook that then we can use internally as our guiding light for the new hire that we bring in full time once we have validated this idea. Or on the flip side, we find out that LinkedIn was not for us and we didn't go through the problem of hiring a full-time employee, incurring that cost, and then unfortunately having to part ways with them. Now, we just went through and kind of compared full-time employees versus contractors and agencies. But what I want to do is actually break down 3 different phases or stages that you may find yourself in and what I would recommend you do. Now, I want to be very clear here. This is general advice, okay? I don't know what your exact scenario is. So there's a lot of nuance to this. This is a good starting point and a good guiding light for you. I would not necessarily completely follow this as doctrine. The best version of this is like, I'm gonna dive into your team, look at everything that you're doing, look at what your goals are, and we're gonna develop a whole custom plan for you. But if we're not able to do that, 99% of you we're never gonna be able to do that with, I would use this as your starting point. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through 3 different growth stages and then the recommended hiring approach that is associated with each stage. So stage number 1 is 0 to 1 year. We're a baby at this point. And what I recommend we do is primarily hire contractors and agencies. That way we can stay lean, not invest a ton of upfront cost, but also we get to test our theories and test the platforms and see what works best for us. I really believe that there are the best platforms to be on, and then there's the best platforms for you to be on. And so what I would recommend is utilizing the agency contractor method to validate, are you cut out for LinkedIn? Are you cut out for TikTok? Just because everyone says TikTok is the best place to be, well, if you're not good in that format, fuck that shit. Whatever format you're best in and most comfortable in and feel you can provide the most value in, that's what you should do, okay? So here we're testing and validating those theories. We're staying lean and minimizing our investment. As the founder, I recommend in this stage, you are heavily involved in the content and strategy that you are making. You should be shaping what this looks like. Of course, you want to bring in contractors and agencies that you trust and that you lean on, but ultimately, this is your brand and this is what you are building. So you should be the one that is shaping what that will look like. The next growth stage is kind of like years 1 through 3, again, roughly. There's a lot of plus minus to this, but let's just say roughly 1 to 3 years in, you are in the stage where you are transitioning critical roles in-house. So what this may look like is maybe you were working with a YouTube agency for a year, and maybe you have realized after that year, hey, YouTube is our top priority. This is where 70, 80% of our qualified leads are coming through. Well, in that case, maybe you wanna hire a video editor in-house. And maybe that doesn't necessarily look like firing the agency, it just looks like reducing their scope. So instead of them doing the editing, maybe they're just doing consulting for you. So you're pairing your video editor in-house with the consulting power and the knowledge and expertise and experience that the agency has. The other benefit in this is typically agencies offer multiple services. So a lot of different YouTube agencies, for example, don't just do the editing, they also help with ideation, scripting, and packaging. And maybe this editor that you bring in-house isn't skilled at those things. And so you take the editing off of the agency's plate and bring that in-house, but then you still have the agency doing the ideation, scripting, and packaging. And so you're keeping them around for very specialized skills. Now, stage number 3 is 3+ years. And this is around the time, sometimes people get this earlier, around 2 years, but typically around 3+ years, this is when you wanna bring everything in-house, okay? So all critical roles that are high volume and necessary to the business, I recommend bring it in-house. We just went through kind of like the pluses and minuses and the benefits of full-time in-house employees versus contractors. So I think you understand the value of having an in-house team. One thing that I didn't fully touch on that I think is actually really worth highlighting here is that when I have brought roles in-house, so previously working with an agency and then I end up bringing it in-house, the speed at which we are able to accomplish and finish projects increases dramatically. The level of communication goes up drastically. It's literally impossible for an agency to be able to communicate with you at the cadence that a full-time employee does because they have multiple clients that they're servicing, right? And a lot of these agencies, their editors are overseas, and so they're in a totally different time zone, okay? So it changes the dynamic completely. The moment that you start to bring things in-house, speed goes up like crazy. Now, what I do recommend is still at this stage, there are gonna be some agencies you're gonna keep on or contractors you'll keep on either for very, very specialized work or access to worlds that you don't have access to. What do I mean by that? Well, typically a media buying agency might have a better relationship with Meta than you do, or your media buyer does, because maybe they're spending millions of dollars a year on Meta, and so they're a more important client for that platform. If any of you out there have ran ads or done organic content consistently on a platform, you know having a relationship with the rep there is valuable as fuck. And so if you can't get that with your full-time in-house team, you may want to maintain an agency purely for that relationship in case something goes wrong. I also believe that agencies or contractors can be very useful to have in your Rolodex available to you so that you can scale up as needed for sprints. Sometimes you might have a launch where you're going to triple the amount of creative output that you normally have, and you don't want to hire full-time people for a temporary need, so you just scale up temporarily with an agency, and then you can scale back down to what you were normally doing, and you don't have to fire a bunch of people. Nobody likes firing people. That's the fucking worst thing in the world. I would avoid it at all costs. And the easiest way to avoid it is scale up using contractors or agencies. Hello there. Before we continue on this course, I actually want to inform you about something really cool that my team and I are putting together. We're putting together a little newsletter for you, and this is different than your average newsletter. We're not going to be sending something weekly or monthly. We're only going to send you emails when we believe that we have something that is truly valuable, whether it's a bite-sized nugget that's going to change your perspective or a crazy in-depth playbook. We only will be sending you shit when we feel it will drive massive awareness for your content and scale your brand in the way that we believe is best. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can go sign up for it at calebralston.com. If not, no harm, no foul. And with that, I hope you enjoy the rest of the course. Amazing. We've hired all these individuals. We've identified their roles. We've made it clear to them. Now we need to onboard them, okay? And I will tell you from experience, a poor onboarding process leads to weeks or months of wasted productivity and a demotivated employee. I will tell you an example. I started at a role one point in my career, and I remember the first week I didn't have any of the tech set up, right? Like the Asana, the Zooms, all that shit. None of that was set up for me. I didn't have my work laptop, and I had no expectations that had been given to me, no deliverables that were required. I didn't even know what meeting cadence I should be on. I had no clarity. And what happened with no clarity? extreme anxiety. I was constantly wondering, like, am I living up to the expectations that my boss has? Am I doing what is required? But how can you know if you're doing that if you're never informed of what is required and what the expectations are? On the flip side, I also had a recent role where I started and I had gotten a 30, 60, 90 day plan given to me like 5 days before my first day. So I went into day one knowing exactly what was expected of me, knowing what my schedule looked like. I had all the equipment necessary, and I was fucking motivated to do some fucking work. So what you get is if you prepare an employee and you allow them to know what is expected, you're gonna get a highly motivated workhorse. If you do not provide that, you're gonna get a highly anxious, apathetic individual, and that may only last for that onboarding period, but it might just carry into their entire employment. So if you do a structured 30, 60, 90, it eliminates confusion and sets very clear expectations from day one. Okay, so we're gonna create that 30, 60, 90 day plan. This is a structured 3-phase onboarding approach that ensures new hires integrate to the team smoothly and understand what the fuck they're there for. Think of the first 30 days as orientation and core learning, okay? They need to gather context. Yes, of course, they ask questions. You gave them the spiel in the interview process. I'm sure you sent them some About Us packet, but let's be real, that's all bullshit. That's not actually how the company runs. That's not how communication occurs. That's not where they gain the insights on how to communicate with the CEO versus the CMO versus their direct manager. This is when they're understanding the company vision, the values, the workflows. This is how the sausage is made. This is where they learn the core processes, the systems. They see a content calendar, asset management. Maybe you use Asana or ClickUp to manage everything. They're getting to understand and get a feel for how you operate. I often like to give smaller tasks. I don't want just, knowledge acquisition to occur during this phase. I do want to give them tasks. One, because I want to make sure that they are able to execute. Technical assessments are great, but you really learn a lot in the first 30, 60, 90 days about an employee. I want to make sure they're doing that, but I also want to give them wins and momentum that they can build upon. I truly believe if you nailed the opening 30 days, you have such a better employee-employer relationship. Also, don't just leave them on an island to themselves and let them just figure it out. There's very rare cases where that is the right move. Maybe if that's what the role is actually like all the time, okay, sure, you could justify that to me. But if the role is not gonna be like that, make sure that you do regular check-ins with this individual. Ensure that they understand what they're working on, understand what is happening on a meeting. They understand who's in the meeting, what the process looks like, what the context of this project is. Anything that is necessary for them to be able to operate efficiently, you should be providing in the check-in. Also, you can be asking them, how are they feeling? Are they confused? Do they feel overwhelmed, underwhelmed? Do they need more information? Do they need to chunk things down a little bit? This is where you get to get a feel and a gauge of where they're at and how they're responding to these opening 30 days. For example, if you hire an editor, this might look like them shadowing your senior editor or some experienced team member. And ultimately, they're reviewing high-performing content from the past. Maybe this editor they're shadowing is walking them through their top 5 YouTube videos of all time and explaining why they got to that level and how they're implementing those frameworks and those structures to future videos. And maybe potentially it's working on internal projects or rough cuts of an edit that you review internally and that don't have high stakes of going out publicly. All right, then you have the 60-day, the next 30 days. Well, what are we doing there? This is where we want to have them taking more ownership. What does that look like? Well, they begin executing independently on their core responsibilities. They're no longer just doing small tasks or just shadowing, they're actually owning tasks of their own. They're also developing their own workflows and systems within the team. We have team-wide process and workflow, but then within that, individuals have their own way of operating. Every editor has a different way that they set up a file, right? Some editors like to go through all the A-roll and then start adding music and then B-roll and blah, blah, blah. Some of them like to go section by section and they go A-roll, B-roll, music, graphics, and then on to the next section. Allow them to build their own workflow and utilize that for the greatest efficiency that they can have. In these next 30 days at the 60 mark, you're wanting to also analyze their work. Look at how they're going about their workflow, the process, their communication, and the final output, and give them feedback. This is where you can start to reinforce the good things and help correct the things that aren't as effective or helpful for the team or process they're working on. An example here is an editor would probably be editing full YouTube videos, uploading them, and then we would be reviewing the performance and giving them feedback accordingly. And then the last 30 days, this is the 90-day mark, right? So we have the 30, the 60, and the 90. And this is chunked down into 30 days at a time. And this is the last section of their official onboarding. We are fully integrating them into the team and giving them a high level of contribution. No longer are they working on small tasks or owning their own tasks, they're owning the big tasks. Whatever the number one most important thing that we listed on the responsibilities on their job description, they are now owning that entirely. This also looks like owning it entirely with minimal supervision, okay? So instead of me coming in and checking in on them during the edit 5 or 6 times, I might check in with them at the beginning like I would any editor, maybe a midway point, and then upon completion. We're also now at the point where they're demonstrating actual results, like true impact they're having against their KPIs that we're holding them accountable for. You know, if they're a YouTube editor, watch time. Is the watch time at least average, if not better than average, what our normal performance is? Or if it's slightly below, are they improving the watch time each video they're doing? I always am looking for rate of progress. Are they at least improving? If they're not where we want them to be, are they moving in that direction? And finally, at the end of the 90 days, you want to actually conduct a 90-day review. Sit down with them, walk through everything that they've done. Tell them all the wins they've had, all the things that you love, the way they communicated, the way Sarah said to John, you know, the feedback on the edit. She gave it so well. Great job, Sarah. Reinforce that and make sure they continue to do those things. But also, there may be things that you noticed in the opening 90 days that weren't as desirable or as effective, and you want to correct those. The last thing you want to do is just ignore a problem and just hope that it goes away. They don't go away, they get bigger. And so at this 90-day check-in, this is where you want to give them some very real feedback. If there's something that they cannot continue doing, tell them now. If you do not tell them now and they continue doing it, that is not their fault. That is your fault. It is your job at this point to inform them of any behavior changes that need to occur. So as an example, at this point, if we have a content strategist, at 90 days in, they should be identifying high-performing content and what we should double down on, or how we should reformat it for another platform. They should be proposing new content ideas, not just reviewing what is working. They should be innovating and coming up with fresh new ideas. And they should be optimizing distribution for maximum reach. And they should be able to sit down with you and take feedback on what they were doing right on all of those and what they need to change on all of those. So now that we have the 30, 60, 90, well, that's amazing, but that's not the only part of onboarding. That is a piece of the pie. That is a tool in the belt, but it is not the entire belt. So if we want to make onboarding seamless and effective, one, we want to provide a clear plan before day one. So this is sending onboarding materials. This is like a company handbook, a vision deck, a strategy deck, whatever that looks like for you, and the 30, 60, 90 that we just went through. Number two is you're gonna assign a mentor or onboarding buddy. Oftentimes, if you don't assign this, they will make their own friend there, right? And that's great. But you wanna make sure to also intentionally pair them with somebody who is going to really help them in the role that they have. Ideally, somebody who has a lot more context on the organization and team and how they function. Typically, a more senior individual. This allows them to speed ramp their learning, but also have somebody that is a guaranteed or verified point of contact for when they have questions. Because in the beginning, we have a multitude of questions, and typically we're afraid or embarrassed to ask them. If you help assign this individual and you clarify up front that this is what they are here for, is to help you ask questions or help you answer questions, and that there's nothing wrong with asking questions, it's actually encouraged to, well, then you set them up for success. And instead of them sitting there trying to solve a problem for 2 hours, they might solve it in 5 minutes, asking Sarah what the answer is. Now, number three is to schedule regular check-ins. You're not gonna have a pulse on how this person is doing and how it's going if you're not checking in with them regularly and getting an update. I prefer typically in the first month to do multiple check-ins per week. So maybe it looks like instead of one 30-minute meeting, it's 3 10-minute meetings, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, end of day. And you're just checking in to see what was the most interesting thing that you learned today? What was the most confusing thing that happened this week that I could maybe answer? What roadblocks are in front of you that I can bulldoze through to make your job easier? This is also an incredible opportunity to celebrate wins and reinforce great actions. If they're a new hire and you're on a call, a brainstorm meeting, let's say, and you're beating up a YouTube video idea, and they contribute a thought, even if it's not a good one, but they actually speak up, man, immediately give them daps for that. Like, give them all the love in the world for that shit, because that is the kind of action and behavior you want to encourage, especially a new hire. I remember there was a hire that I made a couple of years ago, and I want to say like day one, he was sitting in a meeting where nobody asked his opinion on it. He volunteered it. And in some organizations, they might not like that. I immediately stood up and gave the dude a high five. I was like, this is incredible. You're day one, you're nervous as hell, you don't know anybody, nobody knows you, nobody knows your background or skill set, and you're already contributing to the overall discussion. That's what we're hiring people for. We're hiring people to contribute, not sit and fucking be a fly on the wall. And number 4 is kind of a bonus. I don't believe it's fully necessary, but it's definitely very helpful. But if you're resource constrained, I would save this for when you're at a bigger scale. Number 4 is building an onboarding portal or resource hub. And this can be fancy, like, using some software to automate the onboarding, or it can be as fucking simple as a Google Drive folder that has your vision deck, your strategy deck, context on the team, SOPs, playbooks, video tutorials on workflows, Q&A document with the founder or CEO to give more context on the organization. Anything that you feel would help make this person's life within the org easier can live in this hub. And again, it can be a very simple Google Drive folder. It doesn't have to be anything fancy and complex. Just like in the hiring process, we want to define a role clearly. We also want to ensure that once somebody is onboarded, we also make sure to continually define their role clearly. Because as we know, roles evolve, process evolves, needs evolve on the team. And so as those evolutions occur, you should be continually updating the role description. And one of the biggest mistakes I see on teams is overlapping responsibilities without clarity around who is owning what. And so what ends up happening there is if 2 people both think that they own the same task, oftentimes they assume the other person's gonna do it and then nobody does it. And so what you wanna do is if you're gonna have 2 people working on a task, make sure it's very clear what they're each owning and what the expectations of output are from each of them. Hold them accountable. I like to set KPIs for accountability, which removes ambiguity in the performance of their job expectations. Here's an example. If you have a community manager and their task is to analyze metrics, right? They're supposed to look at how's engagement, are we getting enough impressions, are we driving enough traffic to our website, et cetera, et cetera. But then you also ask editors to do the same thing. 1, I mean, it seems incredibly inefficient and pointless, but 2, eventually you get to the point where they're doing redundant work, and what I have observed is they both get frustrated by it, and then they both don't do the task, and then nobody does it, and it's not getting done. And so there are going to be tasks that you're gonna have overlap. That's impossible, right? Like there's gonna be tasks where multiple people have to own different micro tasks that ladder up to the big one. I understand there's nuance to it, but I would really encourage you, if you are gonna have 2 people tackling the same task, make sure there is clarity on what is expected from each of them. So we went through all of this onboarding shit, but what does this actually mean for us? What does this give us as a result? Well, I'll tell you. You get faster ramp up time. People are actually going to get up to speed and able to execute on their role at a high level much, much faster. I can't tell you early on in my career how many different roles that I took, that it took me like 4 or 5 months to actually get to a point where I was effectively creating for the team that I was on. Not necessarily my fault, but just due to a lack of a structured onboarding process that the organization did not have in place. Number 2, the most important thing, stronger retention. It costs a lot of money to lose an employee, like 2.5 times what they actually costed you originally. Employees who feel supported and cared for and actually have clear understanding of what is expected of them stay longer and perform better. Number 3 is you typically get more ownership and initiative. Clarity from day one fosters confidence and independent problem solving. This is somebody who, if a problem comes up, they're not just immediately running and tapping on your shoulder and being like, Sarah, how do I solve this, right? They are somebody who is going to, if they come to you, they're gonna come to you with proposed solutions. So the key takeaway here is I want you to change the way you think of onboarding. It's not about introducing process and introducing team members. It's about setting up new hires to fucking win early and often, which benefits both them and yourself. All right, we have defined what we need. We've defined the roles. We've hired the individuals and we have onboarded them effectively. Congratulations, you are fucking killing it. But now we have to develop and retain this high-performing team, right? We brought all these amazing individuals in, but we need to make sure that we keep them. And we give them an environment that makes them want to stay and feel like they are growing and empowered rather than stifled and capped at their growth. A strong team is not just about hiring the right people, though that is very, very important. It's also about developing them into leaders, lining up opportunities with their individual long-term goals, not just the company's, and ensuring that they never stop growing. Always giving them opportunity to further their growth and see that where they are right now, the ceiling is always moving up. So they're never limited with the amount of growth they can have within your team. If your team is not evolving, you're not scaling, you're just maintaining. One of the first things I can recommend in trying to retain employees and keep them on your team and keep them feeling satisfied and like they're growing is creating a culture of ownership. A lot of individuals that have creative teams out there really believe heavily, I would argue too heavily, in SOPs and checklists. Now, they are very important, right? Checklists ensure quality control. SOPs ensure that we are operating in a very similar function and similar way when operating on a process, okay? So this is super important. The problem is if you build an army, I like to call it a checklist army, you're building individuals that only follow instruction and don't take ownership for themselves. I believe that high-performing teams thrive when they take real ownership of their role. Instead of waiting for direction from you, they're taking action. They're solving problems. They're innovating on content and ideas themselves. If you are the only one making decisions, you don't have a team. You just have a bunch of assistants that are running around doing your bidding. You have what I call a top-down approach rather than a bottom-up approach. So here is how you encourage ownership on your team. Instead of doing what we all want to do, because we care about everyone on our team. I mean, every person I've ever hired, and whether or not you fuck with this, I don't give a shit. I love them to death. I care about every person I've ever hired an insane amount. And so what sometimes occurs then is you want to solve problems for them. You want to make their life easier, but that fucks them up. So what you want to do to create a culture of ownership is you actually want to not solve their problems. When they come to you with a question or a problem, instead of being like, here's the answer, here's the solution right away, you put it back on them. Ask them, well, how would you handle this? If I got hit by a bus right now, how would you handle this? If I was out sick for 3 weeks, how would you handle it? If I went on vacation for 2 months, what would you do to solve this problem? Oftentimes, they know the answer, or they're creative enough to be able to solve it. Typically, what you're finding is they might be being just slightly lazy, or more than likely, they've been in a previous environment where their leader did solve all their problems because their leader didn't trust them. And if you start noticing that they just bring a bunch of problems to you, encourage them to stop bringing problems and start bringing solutions. So if they're constantly asking you how to solve something, encourage them to move from asking you how to solve to being like, which of these 2 or 3 solves would you recommend I try? That is going to be far better. But then again, I would recommend that you put it back on them and say, well, which of the 3 do you think is going to be most effective? And third, give them autonomy with accountability, meaning empower them to make a mistake. If you're going to ask them, how would you go about solving it? They present the idea. You might know that's not going to work. But if it's not absolutely mission critical, I would encourage you, let them fail. They will learn so much more from that than from always getting it right based on what you say. And the crazier part, and a lot of people don't realize this, but they are paying attention to what you are doing. They're seeing here that you trust them, and you trust them despite a potentially not correct or not ideal outcome. When you do this, you empower them to gain confidence and continue to solve problems. And when they realize that there's not a consequence to them getting it wrong, and that you're just going to encourage them to go about it differently next time, they have no fear. And when you don't have fear, that is when creativity thrives. Creativity is not only important for creating content, it's important for solving problems. As an example, I once had a creative director who was technically incredible, right? A brilliant mind, an incredible strategist. But I'm gonna be honest with you, they lacked a lot of personal skills and ability to read another person in the moment. And so a lot of times when we would be filming with the talent we worked for, this individual would ask me, how do I handle this situation? And a lot of times it was in the moment, right? And so instead of them just like verbally asking me, they were texting me. And I started to notice that I was answering it always. I was solving it for them. And what I realized was 3 months into doing that, they had not improved. They always listened to me, they acted on what I said, but they kept asking questions at the same rate. And so what did I do? I started saying, well, how would you handle this? And sometimes this person would say something that I knew was going to piss the talent we were working with off, like bad, potentially interrupting the entire shoot, and maybe we wouldn't actually get a video that day. Short-term bummer, long-term gain. What ended up happening is he learned from his mistakes and started to be able to figure out how to solve the problem on his own, to the point now where he is leading the initiative for that individual and knows how to engage with them and handle any problems that come up very effectively without texting me. Now, we've identified that we want to build and empower these leaders, right? Well, how do we develop people as a leader? I believe that teaching is actually an ultimate hack here. Now, not in maybe the way that you're thinking. I love team training, but I don't like to lead it myself. Not all the time. Of course, I'm gonna do team trainings here and there. It's important to hear from your leader and to hear straight from the horse's mouth. But I actually believe that the best version of this is when you empower the team to do team trainings. Okay? There's so many benefits to this, and we're gonna go through many of them. So why does this work? Well, I think a lot of us have probably heard the traditional saying, but it's traditional for a reason. It's true. You learn a lot by teaching. And so giving people on your team the ability to train others and teach others allows them the opportunity to learn more about that, to really ingrain that learning into their repertoire, into their utility belt. It teaches mastery. If you can't actually explain something, you don't fully understand it. You might be able to do the action. An example is editors. A very early entry-level editor who isn't super experienced or technically proficient, if you ask them, why did you cut this video in this cadence, right? Why did you go 12 frames, 36 frames, 12 frames, 36 frames as a cadence and a sequence? I got really technical there, so please just ignore it if you don't speak editor lingo. But if that's the case and you ask them why they did that, a lot of beginners and novice editors will say it felt right. And that's a totally acceptable answer, but it's not a technically sound one. An editor who truly understands would say, I was training the audience to understand and expect the cadence that I was going to edit in, because the next scene was going to be very dramatic and I was going to break that pattern. And by training the audience to get used to cuts on that pattern, when we deviate from the pattern, it emphasized that moment. That would be an editor who is very technically proficient, experienced, and understands the why behind why they did the cut. And the magical third thing that you get here, which is absolutely incredible, is you reveal hidden strengths and passions. I can't tell you how many different times that I'd have somebody on one of my teams, they would do a training on something that I had no idea that they were really proficient in and were passionate about. You learn all these interesting things, like people that love sound design. And all of a sudden you realize, oh yeah, that's right. All your edits are really good with sound design. Or you discover that somebody's really passionate about storytelling and you realize, now that I think about it, all of your videos actually do follow a very, very specific and strategic storytelling framework. Holy shit. And then you get to spread that information to the rest of the team. And what happens is they start to develop their brand within the team. And so if somebody does a presentation on storytelling, for example, and George, another editor, has a question about it, they're going to go to that person. And so what that does is increase efficiency. Rather than sitting and trying to solve a problem on your own, you know who on the team is the subject matter expert to go to solve the problem with. Now, how do you actually implement this? Well, I would recommend that you conduct a weekly training. Rotate between the different members of your team on who leads the training weekly. I also recommend setting up what is called like a mentorship loop. This is where you take somebody that is more senior on the team and you pair them with a more junior level individual. This doesn't mean seniority as far as tenure, but as far as skill set. So maybe you have a videographer that's been on the team for a year, and then you hire a brand new videographer who is far more technically proficient. I would recommend pairing them together. The cool byproduct of that is the new videographer, she can help train him on technical proficiencies, and he can help train her on proficiencies on how to operate within the organization and how processes work. You get a win-win on both sides. Now, oftentimes when you're hiring an employee, we're humans, so we're selfish. We're thinking about what's in it for us. What are we trying to get out of this person? How can we maximize the returns from this human? But what I would recommend is gain understanding on what their long-term career goals are and start to line up opportunities that you give them with those long-term goals. If they want to be in a place of leadership or they want to hold an executive role, and they're an editor right now, well, something that would be very good for you to do is give them those training opportunities so they can gain the skill of communication and presenting. Oftentimes, especially with creative teams, there's this like myth out there that, oh, creatives don't want to talk to anybody. They just want to be locked in a room and da-da-da. And I believe that that is true, but my belief is the why behind that is because they've been trained. They've been told that's how they are. They work for an organization and the organization never gives them the opportunity to communicate with clients or with the whole team. They never give them presenting opportunities because they say, well, creatives don't like to do that, so we're not going to give them the opportunity. Whatever their desired outcome is for their career, it is your job, if you want to hold on to them for a long time, to make sure that you give them opportunities to grow towards that. If you have somebody on your team that has expressed what they want to accomplish and what you are doing and the opportunities you're providing them are actually going in the opposite direction, what you're going to have is somebody who becomes very dissatisfied with their role and will want to leave at any opportunity they have. Stop being like most leaders and start knowing what your people, what your team wants. This is why creative teams lose great people. It's usually not because of like the work output and stuff. It's because they no longer see themselves growing towards where they want to be. In fact, oftentimes they see themselves growing away from where they're wanting to be. And that is the exact opposite of what a human is going to prefer and choose to do, because ultimately, like I said at the top, we are all selfish and we want to accomplish what we want to accomplish. Make sure you align the work and opportunities you give your team with what they want to accomplish. So I recommend doing this by conducting one-on-ones. And here are a couple of great questions that I love to ask during a one-on-one. Question number one, very, very basic and obvious, but most of you don't ask it. What's your long-term career goal? Shocker. If you find that out, the amazing thing is you can give them opportunities that move them towards that also serve the company. Where do you see yourself after this? Do you see yourself at another company? Do you see yourself starting another company? Do you want to jump to a different industry? Are you wanting to experiment with different roles? What is it that you're wanting to accomplish directly after this? You've already asked what their long-term career goal is, but between then and now, what do you see? And third, what skills do you want to develop? Is there anything that you've been interested in, right? If they're a video editor, but they're really passionate about motion graphics, how cool would it be to be able to give them more opportunities? Maybe you're not able to make them a full-time motion designer because that's not what's required on your team for the content you're producing. But maybe what you can do is say, well, I mean, it would be cool if we made our lower thirds a little bit more fancy and we did some cool transitions and maybe we got a little bit crazier with how we animate text. Okay, cool. You're giving them an opportunity to hone in on the skill that they care about most and where they're wanting to go. And then what you're gonna get as a byproduct of that is them sticking around a lot longer. So the goal here is ultra simple. Make sure you align their growth with what they're doing daily. If they feel like they're just checking boxes and doing tasks, they will eventually check the fuck out. A really good example of this is I had somebody who was at a manager level on one of my teams that really expressed in the opening, like literally in the interview process, expressed that they eventually wanted to be a CEO. and they wanted to have a pretty large organization that they ran. And at this point, they were at a manager level. And so what did I do? I started to give them more opportunities to oversee the team or a section of the team entirely. So not just a manager level, but I gave them a lot of the responsibilities that I had without necessarily giving them a director title right away. One, just to prove that they could do it and make sure that we were putting them in the right spot. But I wanted to give them the opportunity to start to hone in on skills that were necessary, and more importantly, to be able to identify deficiencies they had that they needed to work on to eventually get to the point where they would be a CEO. Now, your jack of all trades, your generalists, or your specialists who are willing to generalize, that's gonna work in the early days, and it's actually not only gonna work, it's necessary. You can't hire specialists entirely from day one unless you just got unlimited money and really deep pockets. But even then, I wouldn't advise doing that. But eventually, you get to a point where specialists are the way that you're gonna actually drive real results, right? We talked in the content section about specializing content to specific platforms. We talked about how in the beginning, you make content, like you might make a short, and then you distribute that on all the different platforms: YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, TikTok, Facebook Reels, LinkedIn Video tab. But the best case version of this is you take that same asset, that same raw footage, and re-edit it, remake it contextual to each platform. Specialization. Well, the same thing is gonna happen with your team. In order to make that content special to the platform, you're gonna need the individual to specialize in that platform. Here's why this matters. When you move from the generalist workflow to a specialist workflow, you get individuals who execute at much higher levels. They gain massive efficiency by doing the same thing, or relatively same thing, over and over and over, rather than hat jumping. They really iron out all the kinks, all the weird inefficiencies. They develop beautiful workflows on this because they're doing it all day, every day. Also, this leads to mastery, which reduces the amount of revisions and back and forth that you have to have with your team. You would not believe how effective it is and efficient it is if you can eliminate 2 rounds of revisions across all your editors on your team. Sure, in a week, that was nice, but add up all that time over a year and you're saving weeks of your time. The benefit for the individual is that specialists have way more long-term career value. They are able to earn far more throughout their career because they are a specialist. Companies will pay far more for that than somebody who is decent or proficient at everything. So by you investing in them as a specialist, the reality is unfortunately, there's all these people that we love, that we have on our team, and we want them forever. But they're not gonna stay with you forever. The nature of a career and of a job is that there is an expiration date most of the time. It is my goal, if you join my team, I want to set you the fuck up so that when you go to the next spot, you are 10 times better than you could have ever imagined. And the way you do that is you promote specialization. They will typically be far happier and earn way more throughout their career. Here's an example of this. And this is pretty typical that I find in creatives, but specifically short form editors for whatever reason. Trevor on my team, I hired him about 3.5 years ago now. And I remember we brought him on as a short form editor. About, I'm probably gonna get this wrong, but let's call it 9 to 12 months in, he started getting to the point where he had mastered how we do short form and was absolutely crushing it. And started noticing the editors that were working on long form content and how sexy that looked and how interesting and shiny that was. And around 14 to 16 months in, he started vocalizing to me how he was considering wanting to move from being a short form editor to a long form editor. Now, a little bit of context for you is at this point, we had reached a serious level of mastery to where he was the go-to guy on the team for shorts. In fact, so much so that every other short form editor, whenever they ran into an issue, would go to Trevor to help solve the problem. And so what I proposed to Trevor is 2 different paths. I said, dude, you're an A player, you're a gangster. I want to keep you around and happy. So I'll move you over to long form if that's what you want. Now, it won't happen overnight because we are a business and we have needs, but we can transition you if that's what you want. The way this will work is if you move over to long form, you're going to go to the bottom of the totem pole. You're going to the very bottom of the ladder, okay? There's already some serious gangsters over there and you're not as experienced in it. So you're gonna be starting from zero. Now, on the flip side, you could continue down this editing short form path. Right now, you're the top dog. And I see very soon in your future, you managing all of the short form editors. Not only being the person that they come to with their problems and helping them solve and the one who always ends up having the most viewed clips, but you actually manage them. Now, a little bit more additional context, this motherfucker was young as shit. He was 22 when we were having this conversation. A 22-year-old managing editors that were like 6, 7 years older than him, potentially. This was a crazy crossroads for him. And I told him, I said, I believe that if you specialize, you will go into a place of leadership that there's not a world where you'll get there if you go over to YouTube. That will take years for you to establish. Here, we're already 2 months out from this. And if you go up to that level, then eventually, if you want to do a lateral move over to long form, you move over there in a totally different position. And so you're not starting from zero. You're starting from a place of leadership. It's a completely different position for you to take. And so he chose to stick with short form. Now, we gave him some long form edits here and there because he's a creative guy and he wanted to do it. To the best of my ability, whenever somebody on my team vocalizes an interest or something they're passionate about and want to do, I want to do my best to give them that opportunity. That's just how I like to roll. But we focused on short form. And guess what? He not only was promoted to senior editor, he was then promoted to lead editor. So he was promoted the most out of anybody on the team. And he was managing 3 different editors at the age of 22 and 23. It was fucking absurd, okay? He only got that because he chose to specialize. And now we're at a point in his career where he is starting to expand and be more of a generalist again. And so the way that this will most likely work is he'll have a couple of years or a season of time where he does more activities. And then he'll focus again. And he'll pick probably 1 lane or 2 that he goes more narrow and gains more mastery on. It's very similar, if you notice, to the accordion framework or method that I use for content. But you can do the same thing with your career. Another thing that I would highly encourage you to do is not only utilize your team members to educate and train each other, but invest in strategic education opportunities for your team. For example, if there is a workshop on YouTube retention editing that you can pay for with somebody who, worked really closely with Mr. Beast, for example, I would highly recommend that you invest in that. And then what you do is instead of you taking that course, you assign 1 or 2 of your team members to do it. Here's the pro tip. Don't just have them go and attend and consume the workshop or the course. Have them then turn it into a team training that they present to the rest of the team. Again, we've already gone over. This helps them retain the information far more, helps them develop mastery, and then they're able to share all of those insights and information with the rest of the team rather than hogging it all for themselves. So we've talked about doing regular check-ins, but what does that look like? Well, it looks like running effective one-on-ones. I believe that if you only check in when something's going wrong, you've already lost. Consistent, structured feedback is what keeps people from checking out. It's what keeps people engaged and feeling like this is an area where I'm growing and my leadership cares about me and cares that I'm actually developing and growing rather than just staying stagnant and letting me fucking rot. In order to do this, you need to run effective one-on-ones. So here is how I recommend you go about running effective one-on-ones. Number 1, talk about the workload and blockers. How's your workload look right now? What's slowing you down? Do you need any extra resources or support? Is there anything currently getting in the way of you accomplishing your job? Can I bulldoze through any roadblocks to make your job easier? Revisit their long-term goals. You're crushing this thing. How do we set you up for the next step? What is it that you've been wanting to learn but haven't had the time to invest in? Are there any interests that line up with your long-term goals that we're not currently leveraging right now, that we're not giving you opportunities to gain skill in, that maybe we can implement that would be effective for our content? I had a content strategist who was unbelievably good at running TikTok, ideating, and creating a lot of engagement on that platform. They had expressed interest in being a creative director. And so I started giving them opportunities to begin developing bigger campaigns and presenting those campaigns, not just developing them, but presenting them to myself and to the talent that we were filming with. The reason why this happened though was in our regular one-on-ones, I was asking them, well, okay, you've come in, you're killing it as a strategist here, you own this platform, you've told me you want to be a creative director, right now, none of what you're doing is really laddering up to that. You're very much an individual contributor here. And so what we did is in our one-on-one, we developed a plan of how they were going to start taking on bigger tasks that involved more people. So when you're developing a campaign and pitching a campaign, you're not thinking about just your sole contribution, you're thinking about how the entire team feeds into that campaign, because it was a multi-platform approach. And in doing so, what we allow for is not only for them to gain the skills of thinking strategically of how to involve other people, but how to persuade other people to get involved and how to think about workflow and process, ultimately laddering up to their long-term goal and vision of being a creative director. None of this would have happened if we didn't actually do regular check-ins to see, are they actually feeling like they're moving closer to their desired outcome? And am I following what I preach and actually giving them opportunities to be able to hone in those skills? So here are the final takeaways on this section, developing a team that grows with you. Number one, push ownership down. If you're making every decision, you don't have a team, you have a bunch of assistants. Let them start to own the process and solve their problems. Number two, make leadership a habit. Teaching and leading trainings should be part of the job, not your job, their jobs. Okay, typically this is an afterthought. You want to make this a priority. Number three, tie their growth to the company's growth. Let them see how what they're doing contributes to the overall growth of the company and the team, especially with content teams. A lot of times they're like the weirdos in the cage in the corner. It's like, don't feed the crazy creatives, right? No, you want to show them how what they're doing is leading to the revenue and profitability that your organization has. Number four, go deep, not wide. As soon as you can, promote specialization. This is beneficial for you and your team, as well as them, the individual. This makes them far more valuable to any future employer. And number five, none of this is gonna happen. You're not gonna be able to measure progress if you don't do structured check-ins. So have the one-on-ones, give them feedback, ask them for feedback on how you're doing as a leader. If you choose not to make time for feedback, you'll eventually have to make time for hiring. If you create a culture of ownership, of growth, and something where they know where they're headed, and they actually feel like the opportunities they're getting are lining up with their career goals, you're not just gonna have a team of employees. You're gonna have a team that wants to build and can build with you. All right, the final section on building your team is building a strong team culture. This is so fucking important. I will not be able to emphasize it enough, but I'm gonna do my best. I'll tell you this, a good team culture is not built by accident. A lot of team cultures are built by accident, but a good one is not. It's shaped by intentional decisions that you make every day through leadership, actions, and how you communicate with the team. And if you do it right, it's not just a fucking buzzword that everyone likes to talk about on Instagram to sound like a thought leader. It actually becomes the operating system of how your team works and how you make decisions. This is how you grow. In building this strong culture, you need to define, and then once you've defined, you need to reinforce the core values. A strong culture starts with clear core values that guide your hiring, your decision-making, and your day-to-day behavior. These are not just fucking words up on a wall or that exist on your website. These are literally what you live by and how you decide what you will and will not do. So here's how to reinforce your core values once you have established them. Make sure you hire based on alignment with those core values, not just alignment on skill set. Again, like we said earlier, skills can be trained. Values, very, very hard to change. Number two, recognize and reward actions that reflect company values. One of the best ways to do this is to publicly celebrate team members who are actively upholding the values that you've defined as a company. And this can look like a message in Slack, shouting somebody out in front of the whole team. This can look like during a full team meetup, recognizing them and giving them a fucking gift card or an award. There's so many different ways to do this, but we all know the feeling. When you are publicly recognized for something that you did well, it feels fucking good and it makes you want to do more of it. And number three, don't be the fucking leader that says all this shit and does completely different. Those are the worst. They breed no trust, and everyone eventually wants to leave that team because they know that they are part of horseshit. That's just the reality. And there's a lot of these leaders out there. The majority of people that lead a company preach these core values, but don't actually uphold them themselves. Lead by example. I remember a really good story actually is back in my church days, I was on a worship team. The worship team is like the band that plays the music before the sermon happens. And I remember the youth pastor said something so powerful to me, and it stuck, and it's how I've thought of myself in any leadership role to date. Caleb, when you are up on stage playing bass in the worship team, everyone in the youth group is looking at you as an example. And whatever you do, they're gonna do 10 times. And how I apply that to leadership is if I am slow to respond, they're gonna be slower to respond. If I show up late to meetings, they're gonna show up really late to meetings. If we're a remote work environment and I show up on calls all the time in my PJs, guess what they're gonna do? Show up in their PJs. And maybe that's fine in your company culture, but maybe it's not. Whatever you do, they're gonna do times 10. Lead by example. If you have a team that is operating in a way that you do not like, take a look at yourself and how you're operating as the first point. More than likely, you are leading them by example in the wrong way. And just because you're the leader doesn't mean that you can hold yourself to a different standard. If anything, you need to be the one that holds the standard and sets it and maintains that bar as high as fucking possible. So for example, maybe contrary to some of the hardcore examples I've been using here, Patagonia has a really beautiful team culture. They prioritize environmental responsibility, integrity, and work-life balance. And guess what? They actually fucking do it. So here's how they reinforce those core values. They hire for alignment, right? They prioritize candidates who are passionate about sustainability and outdoor activism. That's the DNA of the company and the brand, and so they want to make sure that the people that work on it also are in alignment with those values. Number 2 is they recognize and reward employees. Employees who contribute to the environmental causes or develop innovative solutions for sustainability are actually publicly celebrated and even receive grants to further their initiatives, whether it's within or outside of the organization. And for leading by example, their founder sets the standard by literally running the company with the same principles that he lives by, giving 1% of sales to the planet. He even closes the office on powder days to give employees the opportunity to go surf or go skiing. And he treats his work like it's a mission, not just an activity that he's doing to get a paycheck. Now, the next point here is to be transparent about decisions. You're never gonna have a scenario where everyone agrees with every decision that you make. That is okay. But what I would recommend is trying your very best to provide them the understanding of why you made the decision. The quickest way that leaders lose trust is keeping their team in the dark when there's a lot of changes occurring. So here's what transparency actually looks like in leadership. If a project gets canceled, especially last minute, explain why and how it impacts the bigger picture. I remember one time having an editor who had been working 13 hours a day on a project for probably 5 or 6 days straight. Huge edit. She had put so much effort into it. It was an incredible piece. But the person we were editing it for didn't like it. But it sucked for this editor. And instead of me just canceling the upload and not giving them the why, I explained to them how we want to create an environment for the talent we're working with where they trust us. And the way that we earn that trust is if there is a piece of content that they don't like and they don't want to be put out, we abide by that. We honor that. If we do that, they're going to feel more comfortable opening up and revealing more and being more transparent and vulnerable with their emotions in future content because they know if they don't like it, it's not going to go out. But in that scenario, rather than just leaving her in the dark and being like, hey, I know you spent 6 days, 13 hours a day working on this, and now last minute I'm coming in and cutting this, I explained the why of why we were cutting it and why this impacts future content and how it'll make our team more effective moving forward. Number 2 is own your mistakes. Man, if I could say this one like 20 times in a row, I would. I can't tell you how many times that I've had leaders in my life that make a mistake and just brush it off or acknowledge it as it's like, oh, well, that was part of the plan. That was intentional. We meant to do that all along. Everyone sees through your bullshit. They already know that you weren't intentionally trying to make that mistake. That was not part of the plan. Don't fuck around and try and posture yourself to be smarter than you are. Just to own it when you're wrong. The amount of times that you're going to gain respect from people when you do that is 0. When you actually own your mistake and you admit it to the team, the amount of respect you gain is infinite. It's unmeasurable. I am not an any way perfect, very much flawed. But I really always try to do my best. When I fuck something up, even when it's small, I immediately try to own it with the team. I try to be the first person to call it out, because we've all been in this scenario where somebody messes something up and you're on a group call and you're all kind of like vaguely hinting at what happened, but not, I want to be the person that immediately says, no, I fucked this up. I can't believe I did it. It caused all these problems. Here's how we're going to move forward. And lastly, I highly recommend communicate pivots as soon as you can. Don't wait until the last minute. A lot of leaders, I think, procrastinate on this conversation because they're afraid of how the team is going to respond. If you have to make some big pivot in how the team is going to operate in output, in process, in cadence, whatever, it's a freaky thing. Like, humans get used to it. We're creatures of habit, right? And so when you come in to the team and say, we're going to do things completely differently, it sucks. Do it fucking immediately. The sooner that you do it, the more time you give your team to be able to digest this and accept the fact that they're gonna have 5 times the amount of videos needing to go out per week, rather than telling them the week before that you're gonna do it. Ultimately, the theme you're noticing here is transparency. Be more transparent with your team. Share more with them. The more that you trust them, the more that they will return the favor and trust you. Another great thing that you can do as a leader is pay attention to what your team cares about. If somebody on your team mentions the fact that they fucking love Legos, maybe you take note of that, and on their birthday, you send them the Millennium Falcon Lego set, right? Like something absurd like that, that shows that like you care about them outside of work. And you pay attention to what they care about and are passionate about beyond just editing, for example. Another thing that I love to do that I think is very contrary to the majority of leaders is if one of my team members mentions to me that they're sick, rather than being skeptical and not believing them and assuming that they're just trying to, cash in the day, take the day off, I actually like to go really far. I like to send them soup and bread or a pack of juices from like Pressed or something of that nature. I want to show them that I care about them. Because I do. It's not just an act. It's actually just taking what is in here in my heart and putting it external. And this is amazing because if they're truly sick, cool, you're helping them get better, you show that they care, and you give them the freedom to be able to take the day to relax and rest rather than being anxious the whole time. And on the flip side, if they are that very unique individual that's lying, they're gonna feel really fucking guilty about it and probably not want to do it the next time. And so either way, you win. And lastly, I believe that you inspire loyalty in your team by providing them opportunities to grow. We're humans, we're selfish. We want to look out for our self-interest and what we get out of it, and that's okay. So make sure that on your team, you provide individuals the ability to scratch their selfish itch and grow. Ultimately, the best teams aren't just efficient, they're invested in the mission. And this only happens when people see a future for themselves within the organization. And they only see a future for themselves within the organization if they see continual growth. So here are 3 different ways that you can help build a culture of growth. Like I've previously said, but I'm gonna emphasize it right now, make sure to tie what individuals are doing to how the company is growing. Make sure every single team member sees how their individual contributions lead to the company's growth. Number 2, check in regularly on their career goals and aspirations. Ensure that they are actually growing. We talked about that earlier, but what's amazing about doing that is the byproduct is they are loyal as fuck to you. If you actually genuinely care, why would they want to leave? Why would they leave somebody who is experienced further in their career, understands a lot of the landmines they're gonna have to navigate through their career, and that actually cares about their growth and wants to see them reach their full potential and their goals? Nobody's gonna leave that. And thirdly, we haven't really touched on this, give people stretch opportunities. Push them, make them uncomfortable. Give them opportunities that they would not imagine on their own that they could accomplish. What this does is 1, it gives them an opportunity to grow. Cool, amazing. But it also shows them that you trust them. Trust begets trust. When you show your team that you trust them, they will show you in return trust to you. Like I've said, I try to ask every new hire on any team that I'm running, what do you want to accomplish in your career? What is your career goal? And this isn't just blowing smoke. It's literally how we tailor projects and opportunities for the individual working on the team. This accelerates their growth, accelerates their loyalty, and it makes them want to contribute more and help other people on the team realize their goals as well. One element of building a strong team culture is building an effective culture. Typically on creative teams, you have a lot of individuals that are individual contributors. They're makers. And oftentimes in organizations, those makers get fucked because people set up random meetings throughout the day. For a lot of individuals, a meeting is no big deal. You hop on and then you got the next meeting, maybe you have a 30-minute gap. Okay, cool, I'll do some like random little Asana tasks, send some emails, whatever. If you're a creator, you're a maker, that ruins everything. Because your whole goal is to get into the flow state. And if you get into the flow state and you're editing and time is nothing, it's non-existent, and you're just killing it. And then all of a sudden, ding, that Google Calendar notification says, meeting in 10 minutes. Well, boom, done, it's over. Then you hop onto the call, amazing, awesome, call happens. And then you try and get back to the edit. It's gonna take you 30 to 45, maybe even upwards of an hour to get back into that same state that you were in before. And so what I recommend you do for your team culture is implement what Paul Graham created, which is the maker-manager schedule. And basically what it is it identifies that there are two different types of individuals within an org. You have makers and managers. Managers are typically people that are managing teams, and they get shit done by having meetings. Meetings actually are literally integral to their role. If they don't have meetings, they're not getting anything done. On the flip side, a maker, meetings are their enemy. All the editors and creatives watching this are fucking like nodding their heads. Their heads are gonna roll off their neck right now. They're like, yeah, meetings fucking suck. Half the time, I don't even contribute. I don't even get information that is necessary other than for 5 minutes of the call. And then the other 25 minutes was completely unnecessary. The issue is there's no problem with neither one is right or wrong. The problem is when either one tries to function within the other one's setup, okay? So when a maker gets pulled into a manager schedule or when a manager gets pulled into a maker schedule. Now, typically within organizations, like I said, you have both. It's not like you have a team only of makers or only of managers. Neither would be possible. So what I recommend doing is creating maker-manager schedule. Now, the way that I typically like to operate, and you can mold this to whatever works best for you and your team, but the way that I operate is the first half of the day is your maker time. So for me, this looks like usually 7 a.m. to 12 p.m. I'm in maker mode. This is when I am working on drafting things like this, or maybe I'm writing a script for a future video, or I'm reviewing a script for a client and giving them notes on how they could improve it. That is my maker time. And I do my best to not interrupt anybody on my team and pull them into a meeting during maker time. That is reserved, that is holy and sacred time for them to do their thing. Now, you do need some manager time. Meetings, unfortunately, have to occur. I say unfortunately because I think now I'm in a season where I'm a little bit more in a maker mode than manager as much, but they're important and they have to occur. So typically the way I run my schedule is 12 to 5 is my manager time. This is where I try to schedule all my meetings. Now, do I hold to this perfectly? No. One of our partners is in the UK. And so because of that time difference, there's one day a week where I have a meeting at 8 a.m. But if you are intentional and you create this system, you empower the team to be able to follow that. You empower your editors, your designers, your strategists to be able to actually have 5, 6, 7 hours of uninterrupted flow work. It's incredible the level of efficiency that you get. Also, the team fucking loves it. They prefer it so much. And typically what you'll find is they actually end up pushing you towards making one day a week an entire maker day. And what I like to do is I usually have Wednesdays be that day. So Monday would be a meeting day or a manager day, and I would stack as many fucking calls as I could on that day to try and have as few the rest of the week. Because once you're in that mode, you might as well just like suffer entirely. But then on Tuesday, I would operate in the morning as my maker time, and then usually the back half, like 2 to 5, would be manager time. Wednesdays, I'd block entirely for maker time, and then Thursday would follow, and Friday would follow the same exact schedule as Tuesday. There's probably an icon that's popped up that breaks this down. We have a little playbook for you on this that'll walk you through how to build your maker and manager schedule. I can't emphasize the importance of this enough. You will gain so much efficiency and your team will be much happier with their work if you operate this way. So we've talked a lot about hiring, onboarding, and culture, right? Now, one thing that we haven't discussed or touched on yet is the great debate that has basically started to take place in society since 2020. And that is remote work versus in-person or hybrid. And I think there are a lot of benefits and detractors to all three. And so what I want to do is walk through a couple of different factors that you're going to be thinking about when deciding or determining whether or not you're going to be a remote work team, a hybrid team, or an in-person team. And so we're going to walk through these different factors, and I'm going to give you just a couple of points on it. Again, this is a sheet that you can download. I think this will be very useful for you to use. This is an important thing to get right. And when I say get right, I'm actually going to explain that a little bit more. It's not that there is a right or wrong way. There's not. All of them work. All of them have downsides to it. The key is to make sure that you are very intentional about how you go about doing this. The way you build culture remotely is far different than in person. You have to be a lot more intentional and thoughtful remotely because, as we all know, there's amazing moments in person when you're just walking through the office and you happen to pass by that employee and you just randomly embark on a 20-minute conversation where you learn a lot about them, right? You're able to pour into them, help answer or solve a problem they are encountering. That doesn't really happen as much by accident remotely. It's not like you're just like walking through the Zoom rooms and happen to stumble upon someone. Like, that's not how it works. And so you have to be more intentional with how you set up meetings, check-ins, etc. So factor number one is flexibility, okay? And for remote work, the flexibility is unbelievably high, right? Employees can work from anywhere, they're adaptable with their schedules. It allows the employee to be very flexible. This is viewed, in my opinion, as a benefit. By doing this, you actually, in some instances, can pay lower than typical market rates because this is a huge benefit for some individuals. There's a lot of people out there that are parents that maybe have young ones and they want to be able to be home around their kids. It doesn't mean that they're not working. It just means that if their kid, starts puking or something like that, they can actually take care of it, right? It also cuts down on commute costs for them. There's a whole lot of benefits that play out for the employee and the company. Now, for in-person, the flexibility is pretty low, let's be real. These are typically fixed hours and a required location that you are working at. Now, there's a lot of benefits to this, as we'll see, and now that we live in a world where a lot of people have become accustomed to remote work, this is something that a lot of different teams are finding difficult. Now, hybrid is a little bit of a medium here. And that's kind of what you're going to find is hybrid for all of these is kind of like a happy medium between both. This is a mix of remote work and office work. This is far more flexible, but provides enough structure that maybe the company might feel a little bit more comfortable with that cadence. A lot of individuals that run companies have this fear that if people are fully remote, how do I know that they're actually working, right? And so the hybrid model allows you to be able to see them in action maybe 2 or 3 times a week, but then maybe they're the type of employee that gets a lot more work done at home, okay? And so the flexibility here is medium or moderate, and I think is probably more realistic for most organizations and individuals than an all or nothing approach. The next factor that we're looking at is collaboration. Remote work requires strong digital communication tools, potential for time zone challenges as well. So you need to make sure that your tech stack and your standard operating procedure for communication is very clearly articulated to the team. If you expect people to be messaging back and forth constantly all day long, in Slack, you need to make sure that they know that. If you require that people hop on Zoom calls, like that needs to be very clear. The amount of collaboration that happens by accident in a remote environment is very minimal. Every once in a while you get blessed with that moment where you're on a Zoom call talking about one thing and then it changes and evolves into a big project or whatever. But for the most part, you don't get those happy accidents. Now for collaboration in person, this is far easier in my opinion. There's a lot of real-time collaboration that occurs. If we're talking about a creative director giving notes to an editor, it's so much different providing notes on frame.io and giving a couple of notes here and there versus sitting down with the editor and being like, what if we did this? And then the editor chimes in on that and they feed each other and they ladder up to a way better idea than probably what they would have landed on using just a Frame or some sort of digital service like that. Now, don't get me wrong. We use Frame. I love Frame. I use it with all of our partners. I've used it for years. And I think it's a very effective tool and better than 99% of alternatives if you're not in person. But there is a beauty of having the team working together on the ground in person, being able to real time go back and forth on potential solves and solutions. Again, what you'll notice with hybrid is this is a balanced approach. Depending on how many days you have this individual coming into the office is going to be the amount of time that they get those happy accidents, those random occurrences where collaboration takes place that was not planned. But it does also give them the ability to be a little bit more focused at home and have less distraction. Collaboration can be a big benefit, but it can also be a detractor of productivity. Which brings us to the next factor, which is productivity. Now, productivity for at home or remote work varies. This is very dependent on the individual. I would say when I look at the teams that I've ran, half of the people fall into the camp of they are highly effective at home. They have a lot of agency, they know how to own their own shit, and they're mature enough to be able to manage their time effectively and not fall into the trap of putting on Netflix and getting into their PJs or, taking 2 hours out of the middle of their day to cook a crazy lunch or some shit. I know those are a lot of the fears that a lot of CEOs and founders have for remote workers. Now, productivity for in-person work, I actually believe it's the exact same answer. So it varies depending on the individual. Some people thrive in an environment where they are away from their home and they know I'm in the office, this is my working time. However, there are a lot of individuals that have the gift of gab and they love to talk and they get really chatty when they're around their coworkers. And actually, I fall into this category. I personally get a lot more work done when I work from home and do a deep work session versus trying to do the same deep work in an office. Even if I have my own cubicle or my own office, the roles that I've had over the years tend to be roles where a lot of people want my input on things. And so I remember like VaynerMedia, for example, loved the work environment there. It was super cool. It was an open floor plan and everything. But the downside to it, like the benefit was like I could turn over to D Kirk or to D Rock or anybody on the team and be like, hey, do you want to come check this out? Let's jam on it. The downside was when I was deep in an edit, anybody could do that to me. And they could just tap my shoulder whenever. And there's no like do not disturb mode on when you're in person. And so I actually find that half of the individuals that I've worked with are not very effective in office. They don't have enough discipline to not engage in random conversations here and there. And one thing I'll say is even if they are ideating on a piece of content or they're working on it, sometimes that's beneficial, but sometimes that's not what the priority is right now. If they have an edit that's due tomorrow and they're sitting there talking with the team about a video we're gonna film in 2 weeks, that's not the best use of their time, okay? And so again, I think this varies and depends on the individual. So that's why, again, I like a hybrid approach here because you can actually build a team where you reverse engineer the individual. Maybe some people need 3 days, 4 days working from home and only come into the office 1 or 2 days a week. While others, maybe it's like, no, they need to be in 5 days a week. And you mutually agree upon that because they're self-aware and know, yeah, I don't do a good job at home. Like I end up just like fucking around, turning the TV on or cleaning my house or whatever. I do a lot of home activities when I'm at home. So ultimately, I think, especially on the productivity side, you need to reverse engineer the individual. Now, I understand there are some of you that are in bigger organizations and you're about to build a creative team and they have their way of operating and you don't have the ability to be flexible there. Then okay, cool. Like borrow my life philosophy, which is whatever you are given, you will turn to your advantage, okay? So if you do need to be in person 24/7, okay, cool. Make it your advantage, Organize a morning breakfast once a week where you and the team have pancakes and coffee and you jam on different things you've observed online that maybe could apply to the content you're making or whatever. Or if you have to be remote and you can't be in person, Okay, cool. Maybe what you do is you create a happy hour on Fridays or Thursdays. Not Fridays, because nobody wants to do a fucking happy hour on Friday with their coworkers. They want to go out with their homies. But on Thursday, maybe you end the day with like an hour session where you all have cocktails, or you drink sodas, whatever the deal is, kombucha if you're in Bellingham, Washington, or Portland, Oregon. And like maybe you do that and you all jam, and maybe sometimes you're talking about work stuff, maybe sometimes you're just talking about life. I think that you can always try to take the benefits from the opposite operation. So if you're in person, you can take the benefits from remote, or if you're remote, you can try and take the benefits from in person and replicate them in your own way. Now, again, this is another situation where hybrid is the best move, in my opinion. That's what I like to run. The next factor we're gonna take into account here is cost, right? I mean, ultimately we got limited budgets, and some of us have more limited budgets than others. And so this is a factor that I think is probably top of mind for a lot of individuals. And when it comes to remote work, this is probably the most cost effective, okay? You save on office space. You save on, like the employees save on commuting expenses. You don't have to have relocation costs. If you're a fully remote operation, and maybe you, the founder, are based in New York City, you can hire somebody in Florida and California and Kansas, wherever, and they're not going to have to move to New York City, and so you don't have to pay an egregious relocation package, okay? So you save a lot of costs there. Now, for the office, in person, this is the highest cost option here. You're gonna have to pay for an office, whether you're buying it outright or you're renting. That's gonna be a pretty high overhead every month. You also have utilities, and then typically nowadays, I mean, I think this is a great thing, but tougher for small businesses, with the rise of Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, all these cool in-person offices, everyone's aware that like companies can provide cereal and fruit and coffee and all these, kombucha, beer on tap, cold brew, all of this shit. And so more and more employees are starting to expect some perks for being in the office, okay? Like, at the very least, granola bars and sodas or something like that in the fridge. And so you incur not only the cost of your rent or your mortgage, you have utilities, and you have the cost of some perks that you're gonna probably need to provide. Now, in the beginning, is this absolutely necessary? No, of course, there's gonna be people that argue in the comments about like, people have gotten soft, they need blah, blah. Doesn't matter. It's more expensive to be in person for fucking sure. Hybrid's funny on cost. It's actually, I think, the maybe only or one of the only scenarios where hybrid is a very bad option, because you kind of get fucked, right? You're paying for an office, you incur the cost of having this space, and if it's hybrid, you need to have space available for the remote workers to come in, but they're not in all the time. So you're paying for space that's not getting used all the time. So you have free empty space that you're not monetizing. That kind of sucks. This is the detractor, in my opinion, to the hybrid model, which I have been very clearly in favor of up until this point. So if cost is your major factor, it's your number one factor, then hybrid might not be for you right now. That might be something that you can aspire to. But maybe if cost is your number one priority, you're probably gonna wanna go remote. Now, the next factor that we're looking at is talent pool. What individuals do you have access to? And when you are fully remote, you have access to the whole world. You literally could hire anybody, anywhere, at any time. That opens up the door for not only very impressive, highly skilled talent, but also very impressive, highly skilled talent at a reduced cost. Think about it this way. A very, very talented editor, a 10 out of 10, in LA versus a 10 out of 10 editor, same exact skill set, living in Kansas City. Very different. I mean, honestly, the difference between a New York City or LA editor that it's a 10 out of 10 and a Las Vegas editor is very different. And so if you are a remote team, you can hire highly talented, if you're based in LA, you don't have to hire LA editors for the LA premium. You do have the flexibility to get away with not having to bring those individuals. You also get access to talent that is literally across the fucking world. Okay, and so like if you're starting to make international content and stuff that you're going global with, you have access to a talent pool that's gonna understand the nuances of those new cultures that maybe you don't get. This allows your talent pool to go from your local market to the entire world. If you are fully in office, however, you really limit your talent pool. If you're based in Los Angeles or New York City, your talent pool is gonna be fine. You're not gonna have an issue, especially when it comes to creatives. Like those are the hubs where the most amount of creatives are. But if you find yourself in like Chattanooga, Tennessee, or El Paso, Texas, yeah, you might not have quite the same access to talent that those folks in LA and NYC have. This becomes a major constraint. You are all of a sudden limited to people in your local area or people that are willing to relocate. And that's gonna drive your cost up because more than likely, if you're gonna bring somebody from LA to El Paso, Texas, you're probably gonna have to pay them a premium because you're compensating them for a massive lifestyle change and literally them missing out on the lifestyle and opportunities that come from being in LA. The amount of opportunities that pop up for a video editor in Los Angeles are absurd. You can be at a coffee shop editing a video and have 5 different people walk up to you and talk to you about your work. And that's networking at scale. And so if you move to El Paso, nothing against El Paso, I love El Paso. I've been there once. If you live in El Paso, I almost guarantee if you're in a fucking coffee shop editing, you're not gonna have 5 different opportunities potentially pop up like you would in a New York City or a Los Angeles. You really limit your talent pool when you are local, especially if you are local in a non-major market. Now, the hybrid model is a little bit better than the local. So you can kind of use it as like a benefit that you place in front of the candidate. Yes, you do have to relocate, but you're not gonna have to be in office all the time. You can be remote. And so maybe there's a scenario where they could be remote and go back to the town they're from and work remotely for 4 days a week. So they could be in office 3 days a week and then they could go travel for 4. This provides a lot more flexibility for the employee, which does make the relocation offer a little bit more palatable from my experience. The next factor is culture and engagement. And I think you guys can probably already imagine where I'm going with this. Remote is very hard to build culture and to drive engagement within your team. There's a huge difference when I say, hey, Trevor, what do you think of this idea when he's right in front of me versus if I send it on Slack, he might be deep in work, he might be twiddling his thumbs, fucking around doing nothing. It might take him an hour to respond, right? And so speed, engagement, and culture are much slower. It's not impossible. You can absolutely build a very powerful culture remotely, but it just takes more time and requires far more intentionality. I believe that if you are going to go the remote route, be very, very intentional with your check-ins. Send a morning check-in on Slack, seeing how the team's doing. Is there anything that I can help with? Are there any roadblocks that I can bulldoze through for you? Is there any clarity that I can provide you? How are you feeling? Are you feeling healthy? Are you sick? Can I send you juice? Like anything like that, that can help you expedite building the company and team culture. The other thing that you can do, now this is a cost, this is a higher investment, but if you have the budget to, one thing I found very effective is if you do have a remote team, you can create a in-person meetup, okay? And this is a one-time event, or maybe it's a quarterly event that takes place where you fly the team into one spot and you all hang out. What I would recommend if you're gonna do that is make it a combination of fun and work. It shouldn't just all be fun and fucking around, but it shouldn't all just be work too. You wanna give the employees the opportunity to do what they can't do, right? When you are in person, which I'll touch on in a second, one really cool thing that does happen is some employees are like, hey, you wanna go grab dinner? Like, we're working late, let's go grab beers, let's go jam. And they develop a closer, tight-knit relationship, and that has a massive ripple effect throughout your team. The closer they are, the better they're gonna communicate, the more they're gonna understand each other, the less room there is for misunderstandings and weird drama and conflict. Now, like I was saying, for the in-person, I think this is the easiest method for building culture. But there are some downsides to it. One, there's a lot of young people that are in the workforce now that entered the workforce after or during COVID. And so they've never been in person. And so they have no idea how to hold themselves, how to behave maturely. And so you do sometimes, especially I've noticed on creative teams or younger teams, you run into scenarios where maybe there's a little bit more drama that's going to pop up. You might have to deal with a little bit more interpersonal training and education on how we conduct ourselves. Just like you get so much benefit from the high frequency, high touch, lots of contact, as we know, if we spend an entire weekend with our significant other, by the end of that weekend, we might be a little bit more likely to get in an argument. The same thing happens with teams. If you spend all day, every day with each other, you might start getting a little irritated and maybe make a sly comment. and that can snowball. And so that's one thing that I would caution you to be aware of is if you are building a team that is utilizing a lot younger talent and more junior individuals that are earlier in their career, you are gonna have to spend a little bit more time educating them on how to conduct themselves. Now, hybrid is a beautiful blend of the two, right? You get the in-person dynamic where you're able to scale culture quicker, right? You're able to reinforce good behaviors and correct bad ones a lot faster. But you also get the benefit of maybe not everybody is in the office every single day, and so they're not all just chatting around a table every single day as well. And so you get the best of both worlds. You get expedited culture, strength of culture, but also you get to retain productivity that maybe some teams lose by always being in person together. The beauty of having a team that all love each other and get along really well and love to chat and work on shit is, well, they work really well together and they get a lot done. The downside is maybe they end up falling out of productivity a little bit because they're chatting too much. Personally, I would actually prefer, as a side note, for that to be my problem than the alternative. I'd rather they want to talk to each other versus them not wanting to talk to each other. So ultimately, I think what we have here is good, better, best. I personally like in person a lot. I think that there are more benefits to in person than remote for the company, but that's one-sided. I think for a lot of individuals, remote work is better. I don't like to only do things in my benefit. I want to have a mutual exchange of benefit. And that's where I like hybrid. I think hybrid is the best version if you can afford it. If you have the ability to pay for an office that is not always being used and you won't get fucking pissed when people aren't always in there, then hybrid is the way to go. You get the best of both worlds. You get to scale culture, correct bad behaviors, reinforce good ones. You get to do fun activities with the team. You get to know them better because you get the, water cooler talk where you get to learn something about somebody that you had no clue that they were interested in. And maybe that's something that you can start to pour into. Maybe you find out that somebody on your team loves making music. Maybe you have a video coming up that you want an original track to. And so they actually go home and work on that as a project. Okay, cool. Probably would have never discovered that over Zoom. But if you are at a stage where you can't afford an office, then I truly believe you can absolutely build a powerful, strong team remotely. I've done it. I've literally had a team of 14 people all remote before. I know that it is possible. It is a challenge and you have to be far more intentional and methodical with how you approach it. So to recap, hybrid, in my opinion, is the best. Then the next two, I'm just gonna say it. In-person is best for the company. Remote is best for the employee. And so you have to determine what factors here are most important to you. So the sheet that you have, that you've downloaded, what I want you to do is order in priority, what are the factors that are most important to you right now? And that becomes your decision-making framework. That's how you determine whether you're gonna go in person, remote, or hybrid. So here are my final thoughts on building your team. Again, I think this is arguably the most important part of this entire course. One, a strong team is not just about skill. It's about culture alignment, growth, and trust. Two, define and reinforce your core values daily, right? If good branding is an intentional pairing of relevant things done consistently, well, pair yourself and your organization with your core values consistently, and then the team will inherently associate the two. Branding works externally and internally just as effectively. Number three, please be radically transparent. Just like trust begets trust, transparency begets transparency. You want your team to be transparent with you about the problems that are occurring, right? You don't want them secretly dealing with a bunch of different problems that you have no idea about, and then one day it blows up in your face. Well, they're not going to be open and vulnerable with you if you're not open and vulnerable with them. Number four, make growth a priority. Your team is going to see themselves on your team a lot longer if they see a long road ahead of growth. If they think that they're probably going to be capped out on their growth within the next 3 months, guess what they're spending their time doing right now? Posting shit on LinkedIn and looking at potential other opportunities because they want to move the fuck on. Number five, the most important one to me and how I strive to always lead. Lead with empathy. Your team will respond with empathy back. So when you fuck up as the leader, they will be empathetic towards you rather than holding it against you. When a mistake occurs, oftentimes it's not intentional. They're not trying to ruin your brand. They're not trying to fuck up the process or lose the company money. Be empathetic to all that they have going on. A lot of times, these people have lives outside of their job. Crazy, crazy concept. And their lives outside of the job affect their job. I truly believe that if you show up on a daily basis as an empathetic leader, your team is going to stick with you and fight for you and show up for you in a way that you could never imagine. Lead your team with empathy, not fear. If you lead your team with empathy rather than fear, creativity will flourish rather than be stifled. Culture isn't created in the words that you say. It's created in the actions that you choose to do every single day. If you're intentional about it, you won't just have employees. You'll have a team that's fully locked in and ready to build something much bigger than the individual. All right, y'all. We have gotten to the final section. We've gone over brand, we've gone over content, and we've gone over building out your team, and we are at the final piece of the puzzle, which is monetize. And we're gonna start with trust before transactions. Now, most people make the mistake of trying to monetize too early. They push offers before trust is built, and then they wonder why no one buys. The reality is, trust is the currency that precedes the transaction. Now, before we dive in, I wanna just say, I understand this position to be in. Last night, after filming for a full 12-hour day, Trevor and I were sitting at the Airbnb, and we were actually debating and going back and forth, just looking at what could we charge for this course? And how many people do we think we could buy? And we were running the numbers, and I will tell you, it is unbelievably tempting. So I want to empathize with you if you are in a position where maybe you did try to monetize too early. Maybe you did try and get transactions before you built trust. I understand it completely. Maybe you're in the position right now where you're building your brand and you haven't made any asks, but you're still early in the process. And you're like, fuck, I really want to make a little bit of money off of this. I get it. And off top, we got bills to pay and mouths to feed. So if that is the case, then you got to do what you got to do. What I'm about to walk through is the best case scenario, but I understand there are realities that we live in. And so you have to do what you got to do and take care of your family. But with that, before you ever try to monetize, I believe that your brand should do these three things. Provide an unbelievable amount of value up front. Your audience should feel like they're winning and getting so much value before they ever even spend $1. Number two is demonstrate credibility and expertise. You need to become the go-to authority in your industry. And thirdly, establish a relationship with your audience. Engagement actually matters. If people feel like they know you, sales become effortless. You're not having to push, convince, inject all this scarcity and urgency. They trust you. They believe that what you are offering is of actual value because what you've offered for free has been worth more than what they've invested. And so this leads us to defining your monetization model. Now, to be clear, I don't believe that all brands should monetize the same. Your monetization strategy should line up with your strengths, what you're providing, the value that you bring in your content, and more importantly, what your audience actually needs. So here are 5 primary paths that you can take with your monetization model. Number 1 is services. Think agency life, think consulting, think coaching. This is ideal for high touch, direct impact with your clients. You'll find this works well if you have deep expertise and people are already asking for your advice. Number 2 is products. This is digital or physical. Some examples of digital are ebooks, templates, playbooks, courses. One thing to note here is these are also very high margin, and so your profitability will be through the roof if you do this correctly. Now, a couple of examples for physical are like a physical book, or you could sell apparel. There's many different versions of this, but you're gonna find that digital is higher margins, and so I would encourage you to explore this and probably lean into more digital products earlier on so that you're able to scale. Number 3 is affiliates and sponsorships. If you've put the effort into building the trust, you're gonna be able to monetize through very intentional and strategic partnerships with people that align with your brand. Now, what I would recommend you do is don't shill out tools and programs or software that you don't actually use. Make sure that you're always pushing stuff that you actually actually use and believe in. Your brand is your most valuable asset. And if you end up pushing out a bunch of products that you don't believe in or use and that are actually garbage for your community, that pairing done consistently will create a bad brand effect for you. People will start to associate you with the shitty product. So make sure whatever you are pushing or promoting is something that you truly believe in and you know will be valuable for your audience. Number 4 is community and memberships. This can create recurring revenue for you via exclusive content, masterminds, online groups, or even paid newsletters. The list goes on and on. There's many different options for you in this realm. And the beauty of this is it's a great hub for your super fans and for you to go deeper with those fans and build a tighter connection and build greater loyalty with that audience. And number 5 is ads and content monetization. This looks like YouTube ad revenue, podcast sponsorships, or even newsletter ads. This is a very popular route to go, but what I would encourage you to do is pair this with one of the other monetization models. Typically in the beginning, you're not gonna be earning that much in sponsorships or ad revenue, but it is a nice thing to be able to potentially cover costs of production for your content. This is especially effective for the high traffic long-term brands. So like I said, in the beginning, you're not gonna see much traction on this monetization model. This is kind of like a nice to have or an add-on to an already established, more effective and consistent monetization model. Now, a pro tip here is if you're not sure where to start, I would encourage you to look at your email and your DMs and your comments. More than likely, you can see what your audience is already asking for, and then you can serve them what they already have identified they need. This will make it a lot easier to get conversions to occur. Next is share the knowledge, sell the execution. If you give away value freely, people will still pay for the help. A lot of people, and I completely understand why, fear sharing way too much of their information for free. They think, if I share everything I know, why would anybody ever pay me? But the reality is the more value you give, the more demand you create. The more value you give, the more trust you build. The more trust you have, the more likely someone is to convert. So here's the formula. Share the knowledge, sell the execution. Your best content should be so valuable that people feel compelled to act. But then when they go to act, they realize that the execution is overwhelming and they might not have the tools, resources, or knowledge to implement what you have told them to do. This is where the monetization comes into play. And as an example, I have modified my Harley Davidsons like an insane amount. One of my bikes, it's a Harley Davidson Road King Special. And I have done so much to it, you wouldn't even recognize it as a Road King now. When I went to upgrade my exhaust pipe, for example, I watched probably 100 different videos on YouTube on how to change the exhaust pipe. I just wanted to have the knowledge. I wanted to see what kind of pipes that I should choose between, what the best one was for my model. I consumed enough content to know exactly what to do. Now, if you know me, you know I'm not very mechanically inclined, like at all. And so in watching it, what it actually showed me was this is far too complicated and way too expensive of a vehicle for me to fuck up. So what am I gonna do? I'm gonna go to the Harley Davidson dealership that put content out for free showing me how I could go about doing that. And that's what I did. I ended up going and paying Harley to install the pipe. I didn't do it myself. And so they gave me all the knowledge and then they sold the execution. Another example is maybe you give away a framework that helps people land their first client. The knowledge is free, but the execution requires additional guidance, templates. That is what you sell. The execution of the knowledge. So the takeaway here is that the knowledge is free, but you charge for the execution. And now we're going to build your offer stack. A one-size-fits-all approach definitely will not work. We need something that is custom and tailored to each of us and what we are providing to the marketplace. Now, the best brands have multiple revenue streams, but guess what? They didn't start that way. Start with one offer, refine it, and then begin to expand. Don't start with 5 different offers. You're gonna confuse your audience. Make it very simple, make it something you can track and something that you can refine over time before you go about expanding. So here's a simple offer progression. 1, you put out free content. This builds trust and awareness. 2, create a lead magnet. Think mini course, SOP, checklist, playbook. This allows you to capture emails and phone numbers so that you're not just beholden to the algorithms of these platforms serving your content, but you have a direct line of access to your customers. Number three is you have your low ticket offer. This is usually somewhere between $10 and $100. Think ebooks, mini courses, or templates. And what this does is it removes the barrier of entry. Number four is a mid-ticket offer. Now this is anywhere from $500 to $5,000. I know that's a wide range, but it depends on what you're offering. Think group coaching, memberships to your community, or even really in-depth courses. These are for your highly committed buyers. And lastly, number five is your high-ticket offer. Think $10,000 plus. This is your one-on-one consulting, your agency services, or any done-for-you service that you can provide. And these are your very high ROI clients. Most successful brands don't start with their high-ticket offer first. They establish trust and build awareness before ever offering that to the marketplace. There are some unique scenarios where maybe you have demand before you ever start making public content, but that is very, very rare. And the majority of you consuming this, if you're in the early stages, you are not at that point yet. You need to build more trust with your audience and get more people to be aware of who you are and what you offer before bringing a high-ticket offer into the marketplace. Next, we're gonna let our content do the selling for us. Sales should feel natural, not forced. People hate feeling sold to, but they love buying from someone they trust. That's why your brand should bridge the gap between value and monetization. So how do we do this? Well, here is how you can let your content sell for you. One, teach a valuable lesson and maybe end it with a soft CTA. Number two is share client success stories. Showcase how your offer helped them improve. Number three, document your process. Show the behind the scenes of what you do and what you offer. Number four, address common objections. Answer the unspoken concerns that are holding people back. Number five, use lead magnets to capture data. Offer something valuable like a checklist, a playbook, a mini course, or a full in-depth course in exchange for an email so that you have direct access to your customers. Here's an example. Instead of saying, buy my ebook on personal branding, try, I helped John go from 0 to 10K followers in 4.5 months using this exact strategy. If you want the full system, I break it down in my ebook. There's a link in my bio. Do you see the difference there? It's far more compelling if you share the results that you are getting for your clients and for your customers than if you're just encouraging people to go buy the book based on what it is. And finally, I'm sure you've probably gotten this theme throughout, play the long game. We want to monetize without losing trust. A lot of people approach monetization backwards. They think about how to make money first, then build content to try and drive sales. But the brands that actually win, they're not chasing short-term revenue. They're building long-term trust. If you end up doing this right, your audience isn't gonna just buy from you once. They will keep coming back. And this is how you build a brand that doesn't just make money, it stands the test of time. So here is how we are going to execute this strategy. Number one is to deliver so much value that people feel guilty not buying. Instead of following what everyone else in the industry is doing, give away your best insights for free. Don't do the watered down version, not some teaser of what they can then go and purchase. You want to give the actual frameworks, strategies, and knowledge that people would traditionally be paying for. Ultimately, the reaction that we want to build within our audience is, if this is what they're giving away for free, what the fuck are they charging for? When your free content drives real results, your audience isn't just going to be open to buying from you, they're going to feel compelled to buy from you. Number two is build a system where people continue to come back. Create a recurring content format. I'm talking like challenges, weekly breakdowns, anything that gets your audience to keep returning. You also want to make sure that your content is easy to find and easy to binge. Put together playlists, categorize it by topic. Make sure it's easy for your audience to consume this highly valuable free content you're putting out. The goal is to focus on long-term retention. How can we keep people engaged over months, not just days? Rather than thinking about a one-hit viral video, think more like Netflix, a series that you continue to come back to day after day, month after month. And number three, and this is the most important one, protect your reputation at all costs. It is way harder to rebuild trust than it is to maintain trust. Every short-term cash grab that you do comes with a significant long-term cost. You need to be obsessive with who and what you pair your brand with, because these are the associations that your audience is going to make when they hear of your brand. A great question that I would encourage you to ask yourself before you make any moves for a monetization play are, will this increase trust with my audience or decrease trust? Will this make my audience trust me more or trust me less? And if the answer is that it's less, I promise you, it is not worth it, period. To summarize, obviously monetization is extremely important. We have to make money in order to pay our bills, in order to be able to fund projects like this, for example. But the reality is if you try to make that play too early, you're going to burn your audience and degrade trust. You need to make sure that you establish immense amount of trust before you start monetizing your audience. This is gonna make that monetization season, that play, so much easier for you and will allow you to continue to monetize down the road. The ones who are trying to make a short-term cash grab, what they're doing is feeding themselves today, but what they don't realize is they're making it difficult to feed themselves tomorrow. What you want to do is build a brand that allows you to continue to feed yourself day after day after day. But this only comes when you establish trust first. Whew, all right. That is exactly what I would do if I were building a brand from scratch. I hope you got a lot of value out of this, and I hope you plan on taking action. So in the spirit of taking action, please make sure that you download all the playbooks that we've given you throughout this entire course. It is my only goal that you not only consume this, but that you actually take action. That's what makes this whole time that you've invested worth it. It's pretty wild how much we were able to cover. So here's a quick refresher to remind you of every little thing that we went through. First, we started with what brand is and isn't. Then we went to defining your brand, then positioning your brand. Then we went to picking your topics, choosing your content medium, choosing the right platforms, determining your posting cadence, utilizing storytelling in your content, having your community drive your content. Then we went to scaling your content, creating space for experimentation with content hackathons, why your team is everything, defining your needs before hiring, streamlining your hiring process, hiring for culture, training for skills, starting lean, growing intentionally, full-time employees versus contractors and agencies, onboarding your team properly, developing and retaining your high-performing team, building a strong team culture, building trust before you transact, defining your monetization model, sharing the knowledge, selling the execution, building your offer stack, letting your content do the selling, tracking and scaling, and last but not least, playing the long game. Now, like I said, it's your turn to execute. But for some of you, you may look at this entire course and be like, holy shit, this is way too much for me and my team to be able to execute alone. And that's where my team, Ralston, is here to help. We provide the direction and guidance along the way to help you take this plan and build a strategy that drives real results and leads to actual brand scale. And so if you are interested in potentially partnering with us, you can go to calebralston.com, hit the application button, and see if you qualify to be one of our partners. We would be incredibly stoked to partner with you and help you scale your brand. Now, the reality is the majority of you watching this, we will never have the opportunity to partner with, and that's okay. That's why we made this course, completely free for you. My goal is to help you, whether we ever work together or not, scale your brand and see the results and create the life and the company and the business and whatever you're trying to build that you have dreamed of. If you got value out of it, consider maybe sending it to your team on Slack or texting it to a friend that you know is trying to build their brand. It's free and available for anyone. Share it with anyone you think would get value out of it. And last but not least, if you made it this far, thank you. My team and I put an incredible amount of effort into this project, and it's just our second video that we've put out, and I can't tell you how much your attention means to me. I know this was a very long piece of content here, and so you dedicating your time, there's a lot of different things that you could spend your time on. And the fact that you spent it here with me, I'll never be able to explain to you how much that means. So I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you for paying attention, for consuming, and thank you for taking action on this. Please let me know how it goes. Keep me updated. I want to hear about how your brand is scaling. And with that, that is how to build a brand. Thank you so much.